The concrete was still warm from the afternoon sun when Dorothea Simms lowered herself to her knees. Not in prayer, not in surrender either, though anyone watching from the kitchen window might have thought so. She knelt the way a woman kneels when she has already made her peace with the moment, when the decision was made 3 steps back and the body is just catching up to what the mind has already settled. She knelt slowly, deliberately, the way she had done everything in this house for the past 14 years, with her back straight and her dignity tucked somewhere so deep inside her chest that no one had ever found it, no matter how hard they had tried to dig it out. The plate was already on the ground. White ceramic, the nice kind. The kind Celestine Voss kept locked behind glass doors in the dining room hutch, and only brought out for company. Rice and smothered chicken, steam still lifting off it in the thick Dallas heat. Beside it, 2 bowls belonging to the Voss family dogs, a pair of Belgian Malinois named after old jazz musicians, Miles and Coltrane, who lay in the shade of the back fence watching her with the patient, unblinking interest of animals who understood more than they let on. Dorothea picked up the fork. She did not cry. She did not look back at the kitchen window where she could feel Celestine watching, could feel the satisfaction radiating off that woman like heat off the asphalt. She did not do what a smaller woman might have done. Threw the plate, walked off the property, called someone who would understand. She picked up the fork, and she ate, and every single bite she took was a brick being laid in the foundation of something Celestine Voss could not yet see and would not be able to stop. Behind the glass, Celestine laughed. "Maurice," she called to her husband, her voice carrying through the kitchen and down the hall toward his study. "Maurice, baby, come look at this. She's doing it. She's actually sitting out there eating with the dogs." Dorothea had arrived in Dallas the same summer. A heat wave cracked the pavement on I-35, and the weatherman on Channel 8 stopped using the phrase unseasonably warm because there was no season left to be unseasonable about. She came from Memphis, not the Memphis of blues music and tourist brochures, but the Memphis of eviction notices and underfunded schools, and a young woman raising a son alone in an apartment where the radiator worked when it felt like it and never when it was supposed to. Her son's name was Deshaun. He was 9 years old when they left Memphis. He was quiet the way smart children are quiet, absorbing everything, giving back nothing until the moment he gave back more than anyone expected. He had his father's eyes wide-set and patient, and his grandmother's jaw square and stubborn. He carried a paperback book in his back pocket every day of his childhood and read the way some boys watch television constantly, instinctively, like breathing. The move to Dallas had been Dorothea's idea, born out of desperation and a phone call from her cousin Renee, who said there was work, real work, the kind that paid in cash every Friday, and wasn't asking too many questions about paperwork. Renee was talking about domestic work, cleaning houses in neighborhoods so wealthy that the lawns looked like golf courses and the mailboxes were lit up at night like small monuments. Dorothea had worked before Lord. Had she worked? She'd cashiered, she'd waitressed, she'd cleaned offices downtown where nobody said good morning. She had done everything a woman does when she has a child to feed and no net beneath her. But Memphis had dried up on her. The restaurant closed. The office building outsourced. Her mother got sick, and when her mother died, the last thing that tied her to that city went into the ground with her. So she packed what fit in a 1998 Corolla, strapped Deshaun into the passenger seat with his library books and a bag of Doritos, and drove west on I-40 until it became I-20, and the Memphis skyline disappeared in the rear view like something she'd been meaning to leave for years. She found the Voss family through a woman named Mrs. Adelaide Trout, who ran a placement agency out of her kitchen in Oak Cliff and had more opinions about a woman's posture than anyone Dorothea had ever met. "You stand straight. You speak when spoken to. You never ask about what's in the refrigerator unless you're the one who cooked it," Mrs. Trout had told her, handing over the referral card with 2 fingers, like it was a test. "These are people with money, not people with manners. You remember that distinction." The Voss house sat in a neighborhood called Bluffview, shown where the streets were lined with oaks so old they arched overhead like a cathedral, and the houses were set so far back from the curb they looked shy. White stone exterior, 3-car garage, a gate that opened with a remote control, Maurice kept on his keyring next to the fob for his Escalade. The kind of house where even the utility room had crown molding. Celestine Voss had opened the door that first morning wearing a silk robe at 9 a.m. and looking at Dorothea the way you look at a piece of furniture you've ordered from a catalog, assessing whether it would serve its function without taking up too much room. "Mrs. Trout says you cook," Celestine said. Not a greeting, an interrogation. "Yes, ma'am. Southern?" "Yes, ma'am, and some other things." Celestine had tilted her head. She was tall, light-skinned, with the kind of bone structure that magazine editors wrote breathless copy about, and the kind of eyes that were always calculating something just behind whatever expression she was using. She had grown up in Houston, old money, the kind of money that was already 2 generations away from the work that made it, and she wore that distance like a piece of jewelry always visible, never discussed. "Come in," she said, "and wipe your feet." That was the beginning. 14 years, 3 months, and 11 days ago. Dorothea remembered the date the way you remember a sentence that changed the grammar of your entire life. The terms were straightforward, the way most arrangements that aren't written down tend to be. $1,400 a week, cash left in an envelope on the kitchen counter every Friday. No benefits, no taxes. I'd no contract. Celestine called it keeping things simple. Dorothea knew what it actually was. A leash that couldn't be traced, a relationship with no record, no recourse, nothing to show for it except the money itself. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself that every Friday she cashed that envelope. Deshaun was 10 when she started. He was in 4th grade at a school in Garland that was better than anything Memphis had offered him, and he was already reading 2 grade levels ahead, already asking his teacher questions that made her stay after class to look things up. He was, from his very first semester in Dallas, the kind of student that schools wrote grants to recruit, and teachers stayed in the profession, hoping to find once in a career. Dorothea went to every parent-teacher conference. She sat in those little chairs meant for 10-year-olds and listened to teachers describe her son like he was something remarkable. She drove 45 minutes each way because the bus schedule didn't work. She helped him with his homework at the kitchen table of whatever apartment they were renting while her feet ached from standing on marble floors all day. At Celestine's house, she learned the rhythms of a cruelty that presented itself as high standards. It started with the food. "This cornbread is dry, Dorothea. Did you even follow a recipe, or are you just improvising?" It moved to the cleaning. "You missed the grout in the master bath. I want you to do it again with the old toothbrush, not the new one." It metastasized into something more personal over the years. The way bad things do when they're allowed to breathe comments about Dorothea's hair, about her posture, about the way she spoke to Morris when he happened to be in the kitchen. "I don't remember asking you to have a conversation with my husband, Dorothea." Year 3, Celestine made her use a different bathroom, a powder room off the utility area that the houseplants had more access to than the guests. "The main baths are for family," she said, as if this explained something other than what it actually explained. Year 5, she stopped acknowledging when Dorothea arrived in the morning. Just stopped. Dorothea would walk in at 6 a.m., and Celestine would be at the kitchen island with her coffee, staring at her phone, and the silence between them would be as thick and deliberate as a wall. Year 7, she told her dinner party guests 6 women in cocktail dresses eating food. Dorothea had spent 7 hours preparing. "My housekeeper does a passable job." Passable. While they ate the braised short ribs and the sweet potato souffle and the peach cobbler from scratch that 3 of them asked for the recipe to. Dorothea heard it from the kitchen. She was plating the cobbler. She pressed her lips together and kept moving. Maurice Voss, for his part, occupied that particular category of man who is neither cruel nor kind, which is its own form of moral failure. He was a financial advisor, well regarded, the kind of man who sent his daughter's teacher a gift card at Christmas and held doors open for strangers. He had seen over 14 years every indignity his wife inflicted on Dorothea Simms, and he had never once said a word about it. Not an objection, not an apology, not even an acknowledgement. He simply moved through his house like a man who had decided that what happened in the domestic sphere was not his jurisdiction, and he had made his peace with that decision sometime around year 2 and never revisited it. Dorothea had understood that about Maurice from the beginning. She had understood it and set it aside the way you set aside weather you can't change. What kept her going was the account. Every Thursday evening, she deposited $350 into a savings account at a credit union on Forest Lane. The account was in Deshawn's name. She had opened it when he was 11, told him about it when he was 13. "This is yours," she'd said. "When the time comes, you'll know what to use it for." She didn't tell him how much was in it. She didn't want the number to mean anything to him yet. She wanted him to mean something to himself first. And Lord, had he. Deshawn Simms grew up like something planted in difficult soil that decided to be exceptional anyway. Debate team captain by junior year, national merit semifinalist, a 4.3 GPA that his school counselor called frankly extraordinary in the letter she wrote to every college he applied to. He got into 6 universities. He chose Rice in Houston on a merit scholarship that covered 90% of his tuition. The morning she drove him to campus, Dorothea had sat in the car in the parking lot for 20 minutes after he went inside, just breathing, just being still. She had put her hand flat on the steering wheel and felt her own pulse and thought, this. And this is what all of it was for. She drove back to Dallas and was at the Voss house by noon. The incident with the plate had started, like most of Celestine's cruelties, over something that was really about nothing. It was a Saturday. Celestine was hosting what she called a garden luncheon for 11 women, most of them wives of men who played golf with Maurice, all of them dressed in the pale, expensive colors of women who had never worried about whether a color was practical. Dorothea had been cooking since 5:30 in the morning. Fried catfish with a cornmeal crust, collard greens slow-cooked with smoked turkey, mac and cheese made from scratch real cheese sauce. 3 kinds banana pudding with the vanilla wafers layered the way her mother had taught her. By the time the guests arrived, Sakranoe, the house smelled like Sunday dinner at a grandmother's house, and 3 of them said so out loud. Said it to Celestine, who smiled and said, "Oh, I try," with the easy comfort of someone who has been accepting credit for other people's work so long she's forgotten it isn't hers. Dorothea was clearing plates when she heard it. She was standing close enough to the dining room doorway that she wasn't invisible, but not quite visible enough that anyone felt the need to address her. "Celestine, this food is something else. Seriously, where did you learn to cook like this?" And Celestine, not hesitating, not even pausing, said, "My grandmother mostly, and just years of practice." Dorothea stopped moving. Stood there for exactly 3 seconds, which is a long time to be still when you're supposed to be invisible. And then she went back to the kitchen. She stood at the sink. She turned the faucet on and off again. She breathed. It was not the first time. It was not the 10th time. But something about standing in that kitchen, having been on her feet since 5:30 in the morning, having made food that people were in the next room calling extraordinary something in her, shifted, not broke, not cracked, shifted, like a tectonic plate. Slow, underground, the kind of movement that doesn't register until something above it changes shape. When the last guest left and Dorothea was washing the good dishes by hand, Celestine came into the kitchen. In that particular way, she had heels on the tile, the sound of someone announcing themselves without words. "There's rice left over from yesterday in the fridge," Celestine said. Heat it up for your lunch." Dorothea turned off the faucet, dried her hands. "Mrs. Voss, I made fresh food this morning. I'd like to eat some of that if it's... That food was for my guests." The silence that followed was the kind that has a sound to it, a low, pressurized hum. "I cooked it," Dorothea said. Her voice was level, not aggressive, level. Celestine went very still, and then something moved across her face, something calculating and cold. The thing that surfaces when a person who considers themselves above correction is corrected and decides to make a point. She walked to the counter. She took the plate of leftover food, the fresh collard greens and the piece of catfish Dorothea had set aside for her own lunch. And she carried it through the kitchen, through the back door, out into the yard where Miles and Coltrane were lying near the fence in the late afternoon shade. She set it down on the concrete between their water bowls. Then she turned around and looked at Dorothea through the open door. "There's your lunch," she said. "Eat it out there, since you want to talk back like you're somebody." So Dorothea had knelt. She had picked up the fork. she had eaten. And what Celestine Voss did not know, what she could not have known, because she had never once asked Dorothea Simms a single personal question in 14 years of standing in the same rooms together, was that the woman kneeling on her concrete had a son who that very morning he had woken up in a hotel suite in Austin and signed documents that would be reported the following Tuesday on the front page of the Austin American-Statesman under the headline, Dallas Biotech CEO Dorothea Simms closes $87 million Series C round. Dorothea's phone buzzed twice in the pocket of her apron while she was kneeling. She didn't need to look at it. She already knew. Deshawn had texted her the night before. "Mama, something happened today. Call me when you're off." She had called him at 9 p.m. from her apartment, sitting on the edge of her bed, the way she always did when they talked, her shoes already off. The day finally set down. He told her about the deal. She had listened to her son's voice, the voice she had carried to school on her back, and willed through a surgery, and read to sleep every night until he was old enough to read himself. And she had covered her mouth with one hand and pressed the phone harder against her ear with the other, and let the tears run down her face in the dark, because there was no one there to see them. Then she had wiped her face, blown her nose, and said, "Baby, I am so proud of you, it doesn't fit inside me." He had laughed, and then his voice changed. "Mama, when are you leaving that job?" She had been quiet for a moment. "When it's time." "It's time, Mama. It has been time." Deshawn, "I want to come get you." "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because," she thought, "because I did not survive 14 years of that woman's contempt to leave running. Because when I walk out of that house, I want to walk, not flee. Because there is a version of this ending that belongs to me, and I am not going to let Celestine Voss take it the way she has taken everything else." But what she said was, "Let me think on it." What Deshawn heard was the same thing he had always heard in his mother's voice when she said that particular sentence, the sound of a decision that was already made, that was only waiting for the right moment to become visible. The next morning he texted her again, "I'm coming Saturday." She had looked at the message for a long time. Then she put her phone back in her apron pocket and started cooking. There is a particular silence that falls over a neighborhood like Bluffview on a Saturday afternoon. A stillness that is not peaceful but managed. The silence of people who have arranged their lives to minimize intrusion and have, by and large, succeeded. The lawns are maintained. The noise ordinances are respected. The peace is purchased and renewed monthly. It was into this silence that the sound first arrived. Not from the street, from somewhere further away, growing. A sound that had no business in Bluffview, that didn't belong with the bird song and the distant lawnmower and the hush of expensive air conditioning. It was low and resonant, like thunder that had taken a wrong turn, like something mechanical that was also somehow alive. Inside the Voss house, Celestine was pouring herself a glass of white wine. The luncheon guests were gone. The kitchen was clean. Dorothea had done that before her lunch break, before the incident with the plate. Celestine was feeling the particular satisfaction of a woman who believes she has reasserted an order she finds comforting. She heard it and frowned without meaning to. Maurice appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had heard it too. They looked at each other, the automatic checking in of two people who have lived in the same space long enough that silence between them contains full conversations. "You expecting anyone?" Maurice asked. "No." The sound resolved itself as it turned onto their street. Engine. Big engine. The kind that announces itself before it arrives and lingers after it leaves. Celestine moved to the front window. Through the glass, she saw a matte black Lamborghini Urus moving through their open gate, not pausing, not hesitating, pulling through like it had been here before, like the gate recognized it. It was the kind of car that stopped conversations, the kind that made people take their phones out instinctively, before they even registered why. Every detail of it was deliberate, the color that absorbed light instead of reflecting it, the custom wheels, the sitting lower than it should posture of something built to perform. It stopped in the center of their circular drive. The engine shut off. The silence that followed was almost insulting. That's how much space the sound had taken up. Celestine set down her wine glass. The driver's door opened. He was tall. That was the first thing. 6'2" at least, with the particular bearing of someone who has never in his life walked into a room and wondered if he belonged there. He wore a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow and navy trousers with a clean break at the ankle, white sneakers spotless as a fresh sheet of paper, a thin gold watch on his left wrist. Nothing else. No chains, no rings, no performance of wealth beyond the car he had just stepped out of, which was itself a kind of confidence because the car said everything without the man having to say a word. His skin was deep brown, his face structured and calm, with the jaw of a man who has learned to hold things that would break other people. He looked up at the house with the same expression you'd give a place you already knew everything about. Not impressed, not hostile, just seeing it clearly. He walked toward the front door. Celestine got there before Maurice did. She opened the door before he knocked. "Good, can I help you?" Her voice had that particular register she used for unscheduled arrivals, a temperature that was not quite cold, but was not warm. He looked at her. His eyes moved over her face with the same careful economy he'd applied to the house. He was deciding something, measuring. "My name is Dorothea Simms," he said. His voice was even, not loud, not soft, a voice that had been in boardrooms and hospital waiting rooms and every terrain between grief and triumph, and had come out of all of them knowing its own register. "I'm here for my mother." Behind Celestine, Maurice had arrived. The two of them stood in the doorway, a tableau, while that sentence hung in the air between them. "Your mother," Celestine repeated, not a question, a reflex. "Yes, ma'am, Dorothea Simms, if she works for you." The shift that moved across Celestine's face in the next 2 seconds was remarkable, a thing you could have filmed and studied. Confusion first, the genuine article, because in 14 years it had genuinely never occurred to her to wonder whether the woman who kept her house had a life that might produce someone like this. Then recognition. Dorothea, yes, the maid. Then something else, something that started in the chest and moved upward, a cold and specific kind of unease. Her eyes went to the Lamborghini. "That's..." She stopped. "That's mine," Dorothea said. He didn't elaborate. Maurice said, "What can we do for you, son?" "Son," he said it automatically, which told you something about him. Dorothea looked at Maurice directly. "I'd like to see her. Where is she?" Celestine opened her mouth, closed it. "Hey, she's..." She stopped again, and in that stopping was a moment of something that might have been hesitation, might have been the very beginning of shame, but which she overrode. "She's in the back. She's eating her lunch." If she expected him to ask what that meant, she was wrong. Something about the way she said it, the flatness of it, the lack of apology, the casualness of a woman who saw nothing to explain landed on Dorothea like a hand placed on a hot surface. Something in his face contracted and then went very still. "Show me," he said. "Excuse me. Show me where she is." Maurice stepped aside first. Dorothea walked through the front door. The interior of the Voss house was the kind of interior that communicated its own story without anyone having to narrate it. The marble floors Dorothea had mopped every morning for 14 years, pale and cool and perfect. The silk drapes she had dry-brushed twice a month. The dining room table she had set and cleared for hundreds of Celestine's parties, still showing the ghost of today's luncheon in the water rings that hadn't been wiped yet. Dorothea moved through it with his hands at his sides and his eyes taking inventory of every room he passed. You could see it in his face, not in any obvious way, but in the set of his jaw, in the particular way he breathed through his nose. He was placing his mother in each of these rooms, putting her hands on these counters, putting her on her knees on this floor. He was doing the accounting that she had never done out loud, and you could see the numbers in his eyes. He reached the back door. He stopped. Through the glass panel, the scene was exactly what it was. Dorothea Simms in her gray work uniform, on her knees on the concrete in the late Saturday afternoon heat, eating from a plate set between two dog bowls. Miles and Coltrane lying 3 feet away, watching with their amber eyes. The Dallas sun pressing down on the back of her neck. Dorothea stood in the doorway for 4 full seconds. His hands came up at his sides and closed into fists so slowly and deliberately that they didn't look like anger. They looked like a man gripping the edge of something to keep himself steady. The muscles in his jaw stood out in parallel lines. His shoulders pulled back a fraction of an inch, then released. He opened the back door. "Mama?" Dorothea looked up. For a moment she just looked at him, her son, so standing in the doorway of this house she had spent 14 years cleaning, wearing his success like it was the most natural thing in the world, and looking at her like she was the reason for all of it, which she was, which he knew she was. Her face changed. Something in it released, like a breath held for a very long time. "Baby," she said. Her voice was quiet, not broken, just exhausted in the way of someone who can finally be exhausted now that help has arrived. "Get up," he said. His voice cracked once on the second word. Just once. He swallowed it. "Mama, please get up." She stood slowly, pressing one hand to her knee. The concrete had left marks on her skin. He was at her side before she had fully straightened, his hands finding hers, and he looked down at them, her hands, which were the landscape of everything she had done for him. Calluses across the palm, a small burn scar on the right wrist from a pot handle, years old, the dry, cracked skin around the knuckles that no lotion ever fully healed because the chemicals she worked with every day undid whatever the night repaired. He brought her hands up and pressed them against his face, closed his eyes. And for a moment, standing in that backyard, he was 9 years old again, and she was everything that stood between him and the world, and he had never grown all the way out of knowing that. Behind them, Celestine stood in the doorway. She had followed. She hadn't meant to, exactly. But she had followed, drawn by something she couldn't have named. Some understanding that the scene had changed around her, and she needed to locate herself in it. So she stood with one hand against the doorframe and watched. Deshaun turned. He did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. He stood where he was, his mother's hand still loosely held in his, and he looked at Celestine Voss with the specific expression of a man who has no need to perform his anger because his anger is already doing everything it needs to do just by existing in the room. "You made her eat on the ground," he said. It was not a question. It was a spoken fact, the kind that doesn't need confirmation, the kind you put into words not because you don't know the answer, but because you need the other person to hear it said out loud. Celestine's mouth opened. You made my mother eat on the ground, next to your dogs." Maurice appeared in the doorway behind Celestine. He saw the plate. He saw the dog bowls. He saw his wife's face and the young man in the yard, and Dorothea Simms standing there with her hands in her son's hands, and something moved across his face that, in 14 years, had never moved there before. It was shame, clean and uncomplicated, the kind that arrives too late. "Mama," Deshaun said, turning back to her, his voice changing entirely, becoming the voice he only used with her softer, more careful, the voice of a child grown into a man who had never forgotten what being protected felt like. "Go get your things. We're leaving right now." Dorothea looked at him. Then she looked at Celestine. And what passed across Dorothea Simms's face in that moment was not triumph. It wasn't anger, though she had earned the right to it. It wasn't even relief, though that came later. What moved across her face was the look of a woman reaching the end of a sentence she had been writing for 14 years, arriving at the period and setting down the pen. She reached behind her back, untied her apron, folded it, precisely, methodically, the two sides matching, the corners meeting exactly, the way she folded everything she had ever touched in this house, and set it on the patio railing. She walked toward the back door, toward Celestine. Celestine moved aside, not graciously, instinctively, the way you move when something is coming toward you that has always been bigger than you understood. Dorothea stopped. She was close enough that Celestine could see the lines around her eyes, the gray coming in at her temples. She could see 14 years on this woman's face, and she realized, perhaps for the first time, and what 14 years actually looked like. "I cooked every meal you took credit for," Dorothea said. Her voice was calm, not loud, not righteous, just clear, the way things are clear when they have been true for a long time and finally get said. "I cleaned this house when you were too tired. I ironed the clothes you wore to events where people told you how lovely you looked. I raised your children on the days you needed a break from raising them." She paused. She let that sit. "And you made me eat with the dogs." Celestine said nothing. Her lips parted, and then closed, and she said nothing. "I forgive you," Dorothea said, and she meant it. You could hear that she meant it, that it was not a weapon but an actual release. The kind of forgiveness that is more about the person giving it than the person receiving it. "But you will carry this day for the rest of your life." Then she walked through the kitchen, through the dining room, through the front hall. She did not go to the side entrance. She did not take the service exit. She walked through the front door, the door that had been for family and guests, the door she had not been allowed to use in 8 years. And she stepped out into the Dallas afternoon like a woman who had just finished a job that took everything she had and would not be looking back. Deshaun paused at the threshold. He reached into the breast pocket of his shirt and withdrew a card. White stock, simple font, no flourish. He held it between two fingers, not offering it yet, just holding it. Then he turned to Maurice. Maurice Voss was still standing in the hallway, and he looked, if for the first time since Dorothea had known him, like a man who had been caught at something. Not caught by anyone external. Caught by himself. The worst kind. "Maurice Voss," Deshaun said. Maurice nodded slightly, reflexively, the way you respond when someone says your name like they already know you. "I know who you are," Deshaun continued. "You do commercial development. You've got 2 major projects in progress right now." He extended the card. "Take it." Maurice took it, looked down. The card said, Dorothea Simms, CEO and founder, Meridian Health Technologies. Maurice read it once, read it again. His grip on the card tightened. "Meridian," he said. His voice had gone quiet in a particular way. "That's the—" He stopped. "The firm that provided bridge financing on your Henderson Street development 3 years ago," Deshaun said. "When 4 banks turned you down, the capital came through a subsidiary called Brightline Capital Partners. You shook hands with a man named Gerald Okafor and never traced who was behind it." He let that settle. "Gerald works for me." The card was shaking slightly in Maurice's hand. "And the Mockingbird Commons project, the one you've been trying to close for the last 2 months. You need a capital co-signature from an institutional partner. You've been in conversations with a firm called Arch Meridian Holdings." Deshaun paused. "That's also mine." The silence that filled the hallway was the silence of a man watching the architecture of a situation completely reorganize itself around him. "She could have told you who I was," Deshaun said. His voice was even, not cruel, just honest, the honest that costs something to speak. At any point, year 1, year 5, year 10. She could have walked into your kitchen one morning and said her son ran a biotech company and watched both of you change the way you treated her. She never did. 14 years she was in this house, and she never once used my name. Not once. Maurice looked at Celestine. Celestine was looking at the floor. "That's who you had cleaning your bathrooms," Deshaun said. "And you made her eat outside with the dogs." He turned. He walked through the front door. Outside, the afternoon light had gone the color of honey and bourbon, the way Dallas light does in the hour before sunset, turning everything it touches into something that looks like it was meant to be beautiful all along. Dorothea was standing by the Lamborghini. She had her arms folded loosely across her chest. Well, not defensively. She just didn't know quite where to put them, which was unusual for a woman who had always known exactly where to put everything. She was looking at the car with an expression that mixed wonder with the particular amusement of a woman who raised someone and then one day looked at them and realized she had somehow not fully anticipated who they would become. Deshaun came down the front steps and stopped beside her. "It's too much car," she said. He laughed. A real laugh, deep and sudden, the kind that shakes something loose in the chest. "Mama, I'm just saying, it's very—" She tilted her head. "It's a lot." "Get in," he said. She ran one hand along the door's edge, feeling the metal cool and smooth. Then she got in. Deshaun walked around to the driver's side. At the door, he turned, looked back at the house. See, Celestine was standing in the doorway. The cream-colored dress she'd worn for the luncheon seemed wrong now, somehow, too festive for the look on her face. She was watching Dorothea in the passenger seat of that car, and something in her expression had collapsed completely. All the architecture of it, the superiority, the casual cruelty, the 14 years of careful hierarchy, all of it dismantled by a single afternoon, lying in pieces she would be sorting through for a long time. Deshawn held her gaze for a moment. Then he got in, started the engine, and let the sound do what sound does. They pulled out of the driveway and down the tree-lined street, the late afternoon sun falling through the oaks and striping the road with light, and Dorothea Simms did not look back. Not once. She was looking forward. At the street, or at Dallas opening itself up in front of them, at her son's hands on the wheel, and at whatever came next, which was everything she had spent 14 years purchasing. 3 weeks later, Dorothea was standing in the middle of a living room she had never been in before, and it belonged to her. Lakewood, East Dallas, where the streets had names that sounded like someone had named them, in love with the landscape. And the houses sat back from the sidewalk, behind old trees that had decided to stay and had made the neighborhood richer for the decision. The house was 4 bedrooms, a wide porch, a kitchen with a gas range, and marble countertops that caught the morning light and threw it back across the ceiling. Deshawn handed her the keys on a Thursday. He had bought it in cash, in the way you buy things when the number doesn't require deliberation, and he had handed her the envelope with the deed and said, "Yours, all of it. No lease, no terms, no conditions, just yours." She had walked through every room slowly. She had touched the walls, opened closets, stood in the kitchen with her hands flat on the countertops and felt the marble under her palms. Different from Celestine's marble, hers now, belonging to her the way things belong to you when you have come by them honestly. She sat down at the kitchen table and folded her hands and cried. Not the quiet, controlled kind she had learned over years of crying in cars and utility closets. The other kind, the kind that is not sad but releasing, the body emptying out everything it has been carrying so carefully for so long. She cried until she was finished, which took a while, and then she stood up, wiped her face, and looked around her kitchen. She got a pot out. She found the groceries Deshawn had stocked the pantry with. She put the pot on the gas range and started making rice. Because that was who Dorothea Simms was, a woman who finished grieving and then fed people, a woman who came to the end of something and responded by beginning something else. The Voss family situation in the months that followed was not catastrophic. It was something more precise and harder to recover from, a slow contraction. Deshawn did not make phone calls to ruin them. He did not issue statements. He simply withdrew. The bridge loan on Henderson Street came due and Meridian's subsidiary declined to extend. The Mockingbird Commons deal fell apart when Arch Meridian Holdings sent a 2-sentence email withdrawing from negotiations without explanation. 2 other investors who moved in the same circles heard through the particular osmosis of the real estate world that something had shifted, that a key relationship had soured, and they recalibrated their exposure accordingly. Maurice Voss spent 6 months rebuilding from a foundation that had, unbeknownst to him, been partially constructed on the generosity of a woman he had allowed to be humiliated in his own backyard. He made it through. He was competent enough, well-connected enough to survive, but he came out the other side changed, quieter, less comfortable. The way a man is changed when he looks directly at what his passivity has cost and cannot pretend he didn't see it. Was Celestine let the gardener go? Let the part-time housekeeper go. She started doing her own grocery shopping, her own laundry, her own cleaning. It was the cleaning that stayed with her. She had gotten down on her hands and knees to clean the kitchen floor one Saturday morning, a Sunday, and the texture of the marble under her palms was familiar in a way that confused her before she understood why. And then she understood. She had been on her knees on this floor every morning for a year, and she had been doing it for less than 12 months, and her back already hurt, and her hands already burned from the cleaning products, and she understood, in the way you can only understand a thing by inhabiting it, what 14 years of it might feel like. She sat back on her heels. She looked at the floor. She thought about Dorothea Simms. She thought about the plate on the concrete, the dogs, the laugh she had given through the window when Dorothea was still out there, still eating, and she had called to Morris, "Come see, she's actually doing it." Like it was entertainment. Like it was something to call someone to watch. She put her face in her hands. The apology came 3 months after Dorothea had moved into her house in Lakewood. It was a Saturday morning. Celestine drove herself, which she now did in a car that was not the car she had driven when she had a full-time driver 3 days a week. She parked at the curb and sat for a long time. She had written down what she wanted to say in a notebook the night before, crossing things out and rewriting them, and had decided by midnight that she was going to throw the notebook away and say what was actually true instead of what sounded right. She walked up the porch steps. The door had a small wreath on it that looked like something someone had hung because they wanted the house to look welcoming. And Celestine understood that this detail meant something, that Dorothea Simms had made a home, was making one, actively, with the same hands that had made Celestine's home for her for 14 years. She rang the bell. The door opened. Dorothea was wearing a house dress, her own, not a uniform, and she had her reading glasses up on her forehead. She looked well. That was the first thing Celestine noticed, because it was unexpected, or maybe she had expected something else. Exhaustion, diminishment, the look of a woman still recovering from what she'd been through. Instead, Dorothea looked rested. She looked like herself, or like the self that had been under all the other selves, the one that hadn't been visible in Celestine's kitchen. They looked at each other for a long moment, 10 seconds maybe, the kind that expand. Celestine's chin went first. She had practiced being composed and it didn't hold. Dorothea, her voice broke on the name. She swallowed. I am so sorry. She pressed her lips together. I am so sorry for everything. For all of it. For years of it. Her shoulders were shaking. I don't know who I was or how I let myself. She stopped. There's no way to make it right. I know that. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I know. She was crying fully now, the unglamorous kind, and the kind that doesn't care about what it looks like. She didn't try to stop it. Dorothea looked at her for another moment, that same expression from the backyard, not triumphant, not cold, seeing clearly. Then she stepped back, opened the door wider. Come inside, she said. I just made jollof rice. Celestine broke open on the doorstep. Her shoulders heaved. She was crying the way you cry when grace arrives and you know you have not earned it. When kindness comes from a direction you forfeited the right to expect it from, and it comes anyway. She stepped inside. The house was warm. It smelled like rice and something green cooking, and the particular smell of a home that is actually lived in. Not maintained, not managed, lived in. There were photographs on the mantel. She looked at them. Dorothea as a young woman in Memphis, sharp and bright. Deshaun at what looked like a graduation, his mother beside him with her hand on his shoulder, and both of them laughing at something off camera. A woman who must have been Dorothea's mother. A life, whole and complete, that had been living itself right alongside the life in Celestine's house all those years. She had never known any of it. She had never asked. Dorothea set a bowl on the kitchen table. She sat down across from Celestine and folded her hands, and for a while neither of them said anything. Just the sound of the house, the rice on the stove, Dallas outside the window. Why did you open the door? Celestine finally asked. Dorothea considered this the way she considered most things, not rushing it. Because closing it would have been for me, she said. And I spent a long time doing things only for myself. It's different over here. She looked at Celestine steadily. Also, my mother always said feed people first. Figure out how you feel about them second. Celestine almost smiled. She sounds like she was something. She was everything, Dorothea said. Most of what I know about surviving, I learned from watching her do it. They ate the jollof rice. It was extraordinary. It always was. And Celestine said so, this time with no claim attached to it. Just the truth. The evening before the move, Deshaun had sat with his mother on the porch of her old apartment on Gaston Avenue. The sky had gone through its full performance. Orange into pink into the deep bruised purple that comes right before dark in summer, and when the heat finally starts to release and the city breathes for the first time all day. 2 chairs, 2 glasses of sweet tea, the sounds of the neighborhood settling in. Mama, he'd said after a while, I need to ask you something. She'd waited. Why didn't you leave sooner? All those years. You could have walked any time, especially after I started making money. Why did you stay?" She was quiet for a long time. A car moved down the street. A child somewhere called to another child and was answered. "I stayed," she said finally, "because leaving would have been about her. And I refused to let one more thing in that house be about her." He turned to look at her. "Everything I did in that house," she said, "every yes ma'am, every floor, every meal, I turned it. I turned all of it away from her and toward you. She thought she was taking something from me every time she humiliated me." Dorothea shook her head slowly. "She was never taking anything. I was depositing." Deshawn's eyes filled. He looked away quickly, back at the street, blinking. "You are the house I built," she said. She reached over and took his hand. He was 30 years old, 6'2", worth more money than she had the context to fully imagine. And he held her hand like a boy who is grateful his mother reached first. "Every sacrifice I made went into you. The floors I scrubbed built your work ethic. The insults I swallowed taught you what dignity looks like when it's chosen rather than given. The years I stayed taught you that commitment to something beyond yourself is not weakness." She squeezed his hand. "You are every brick, baby. Kira, don't you ask me if it was worth it." "Was it?" he whispered anyway. She looked at him. The porch light caught the gray at her temples and the lines around her eyes and the specific beauty of a woman who has been refined by something hard and come out the other side knowing who she is. "Look at you," she said. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. They sat until the stars came out, which in Dallas requires patience because the city lights argue with the dark for a long time before the dark wins. They sat until the street got quiet and the last of the heat went out of the air and the night sounded like peace. A mother, her son, a porch in East Dallas, everything she had given, everything he had become. Between them in the summer dark, the accounting was complete. Here is what people who tell this kind of story often miss. The miracle was not the Lamborghini. It was never the Lamborghini. The miracle was a woman in a gray work uniform on her knees on concrete, back straight, head held at that particular angle that means I see you clearly, and I am not afraid of you, and I will not let this be the story I tell about myself. The miracle was the Thursday deposits. The miracle was the parent-teacher conferences and the 45-minute drives and the sitting up at kitchen tables and the paperback books in a child's back pocket. The miracle was every moment of choosing purpose over pride, because pride would have told her to leave, but purpose knew better. Celestine Voss had spent 14 years trying to make a woman small. She had used every tool available to her. Contempt, humiliation, the particular violence of being treated like furniture while you serve someone their dinner. She had been thorough and creative and relentless. She had failed completely. Not because Dorothea was unaffected. She was affected. Some of those years had cost her things she would not name, had pressed marks into her that would take longer than one good house to heal. The body carries what we tell it we're fine about. The body keeps the accounting even when we don't. But there is a kind of person who takes what is done to them and uses it as material. Not despite the suffering, but through it, transforming each humiliation into clarity, each insult into resolve, each morning of choosing to go back into a difficult place into a morning of choosing their child over their comfort. Dorothea Simms was that kind of person. And one Saturday in Dallas, when a matte black car rolled through a gate and a tall young man stepped out of it and walked toward a house with the calm of someone who has already decided how the story ends, the evidence of what she had built arrived to collect her. She walked out the front door. She didn't look back. Some people wait for justice. Dorothea Simms had been too busy building something to wait for anything.